All you lovely people. Let's continue on talking about Aristotle's ideas about the excellences of character. So again, just to remind you, we are looking at, again, the subservient aspect of our soul, which concerns our emotions, desires, and appetites, but they are still able to respond to and be governed by our reason. And so we've seen now that, doing this well, governing our reason, governing our desires, appetites, and emotions, doing this well is what it means to have, excellence of character, or to have the excellences. It's going to be several of character. And now we've looked at the first two parts of Aristotle's definition of excellence of character, which is about how we can develop and cultivate dispositions and habits that allow us to govern our desires, emotions, and appetites. And we do that in a way that's issuing in decisions and choice. Again, the idea being that we are in control, and it's not our emotions, desires, and appetites that are in control. Okay, cool. So now we can look at the third and fourth parts of this definition, where excellence of character is in an intermediate relative to us. Now, what we're seeing here is what's known today as Aristotle's doctrine of the mean. And Aristotle begins developing this idea of his doctrine of the mean. He doesn't call it that, by the way. That's what we just call it today. He's developing this in chapter 2 of book 2. This is on pages 7 and 8, if you're curious, because there Aristotle talks about how the things that, I love this idea, the things that make excellence of character possible are the exact same things that can be the undoing or the destruction of an excellence of character. Ooh la la. And actually, this is the cheesiest example in the world, and I apologize. But if you've actually read the book, Game of Thrones, I'm not talking about the TV show, mixed feelings on that, needless to say, but the book, Game of Thrones, the first book in that series. Now, this idea that I'm talking about actually appears very early on. Because you have, it might be the first chapter. I don't remember. It's very early on in the book, though. But you have this character, this child. His name is Bran, and this character asks, he says, "Can a man still be brave if he's afraid?" And this child Bran asks this to his father: "Can a man be brave if can a man still be brave if he's afraid?" And he's asked that to his dad, and his dad, that's Ned. Ned says in response, "That is the only time a man can be brave." Ooh, really? And I know it's a super cheesy quote, but Aristotle would totally dig it, because this is totally his idea. Because we can ask ourselves, what makes courage or bravery possible? And Aristotle will say what makes courage and bravery possible are our capacities for fear and for confidence. Those are two very powerful capacities we have as human beings. And for Aristotle, it's particularly about how fear and confidence are connected to death. Oh, yeah. And we can see that when Ned, the father, says to his son Bran that a person can only be brave when they have fear. And so, yeah, Aristotle is going to say it is fear that makes the excellence of courage, of bravery, possible. But Aristotle also notes that that same thing, that capacity for fear, also makes it the possibility of excellence being destroyed, because that fear can become too strong. That destroys courage, and that creates cowardice, not courage. And so Aristotle does note that life involves human life. We're human, we're messy. We have lots of capacities for different kinds of emotions, different kinds of desires, lots of different appetites, right? Yeah, because human life involves things like emotions, like fear, anger, pride. Human life also involves desires for things like pleasure or money. And human life also involves appetites for things like food and drink and reproduction, because why not? That's human life. But Aristotle believes that all these emotions, all these desires, all these appetites, and lots of other aspects of the human experience, all these different things make the excellences of character possible. That is, for every excellence of character, and we'll see some by the end of this video, for every excellence of character, Aristotle says there will be a substrate or a continuum that is based on our emotions, desires, or appetites. And so we've seen this already with the excellence of courage, is based on a substrate or continuum of fear. Because, as I've said, courage is about how we handle or respond to our fears. However, the substrate or continuum, whatever it is that, makes an excellence of character possible, that substrate can also destroy that excellence. Because Aristotle says an excellence can be destroyed in two different ways. On the one hand, excellence can be destroyed by defect, by having too little of something. Meanwhile, excellence could also be destroyed by excess, by having too much of something. So now we can go back. Let's go back to that example of courage. Again, courage is the excellence, and courage is made possible because of fear. And so the feeling of fear is that substrate that makes courage possible. However, if you have too much fear, you have an excess of fear, well, then courage is destroyed and you are a coward. Or if you have too little fear, you have a deficiency of fear, then courage is destroyed and you become rash or reckless. So the excellence of character is found in the proper portioning or in the mean or in this intermediate area of the substrate lying between those two extremes. And so courage is found in this general mean region between the extremes of excess and deficiency, and courage will devolve, having the right amount of fear, having fear in the right way, having fear at the right time, and so on. Now, in chapter 6 of book 2, that's on pages 10, 11, and 12, Aristotle goes into a little bit more detail about this doctrine of the mean. Because yes, as we've just said, is that excellence of character is a mean between two extremes, or it's an intermediacy between two extremes. Now, the mean or this intermediacy, as Aristotle says, is not mathematical. That is, the mean or the intermediacy is not literally the middle. It's just referring to this general region between those two extremes of deficiency and excess. And similarly, this mean, this intermediacy, it's not universal. That is, the mean is not literally going to be the same for everyone. And you can see this in the fourth part of the definition of excellence, where Aristotle says that that intermediacy is relative to us. And by us, Aristotle means you. Because courage for you might be different than the courage of a military soldier. Well, maybe you're ROTC or, maybe you're ROTC. Okay, well, the courage of a soldier is definitely different from the courage of me, Professor Gray, because I'm not someone who I hope will never be in combat. And so I don't know that kind of courage, and hopefully never will need to, because I won't have that kind of courage. But I don't need it for my human life. But some people, soldiers, absolutely need that kind of courage for their lives. And of course, this is what Aristotle is talking about when he talks about courage. He's talking about fear of death. Aristotle is quite clear. Courage is possible, says Aristotle, because of fear of death. But today, modern society, that's probably not our main area of concern, because as it turns out, I believe this is still true. Someone can tweet me if I'm wrong, or tweet me if I'm right. I'd like to know if I'm right. But apparently my understanding is that fear of death is actually the second. It's number 2. It's the second most feared thing, at least by Americans. That's my understanding anyway. What's number 1 then? Does anyone know? What's the number 1 fear of most Americans? Public speaking. So that means if you're at a funeral, you're better off in the coffin than giving the eulogy. Yeah, I try. Anyway, but what we're seeing, though, is in modern America, and not even just in modern America, modern world, fear of death may not be the ultimate display of courage, because a lot of us don't have to worry about dying like a soldier does, for instance. An active soldier has a very different kind of courage than what I have. And so that's what Aristotle's meaning about this intermediate. It's relative to us in the sense that it's practical because it's geared towards action, and different actions will be in different situations. And so that means it's particular because, again, it's different from different people. Different persons will have different notions of or different needs or demands of courage. And it's also relative to us because it's situational. The situation of a soldier is far different from my situation. So just again, courage is practical because courage is about acting in the face of fear. Courage is particular to the particular individual who has to be displaying courage. And courage is situational, where courage in combat is far different from courage in public speaking. All of these are important. But that's the sense of when Aristotle is saying that the mean or this intermediacy is relative to us. It's going to be relative to the action, to the situation, to the person. Wow. Kind of cool. And now Aristotle, if you look in chapter 7, he goes on to give lots of examples of excellences of character. This is on pages 12, 13, 14, and 15. And here you can see them listed out in this table here. And as you're looking through all these, it's the important thing to identify is the underlying substrate or continuum, because that's going to be about the emotion, desire, or appetite that the excellence governs. So for instance, you can see that moderation there is the excellence associated with physical pleasure. You can see that mildness is the excellence associated with temper or anger. And my favorite, of course, wittiness is the excellence associated with humor. And you can see all those on the list. Again, lots of virtues and lots of, again, substrates. And then if you look at that table, you can start to see the associated extremes as well. So like too much humor and you're a buffoon, or too little humor and you're a boor. Anyhow, you saw a lot of excellences there. Here, I'll just throw it back up one more time. There they are again. And what Aristotle is doing here is he's trying to cover all the areas of life faced by a person, by a human being. And he's trying to discover all these areas. And so he wants to discover the excellence of character associated with that area of life. And again, each excellence that you're seeing on this list here is focusing on a particular human area that no person, no human could reasonably expect to avoid during their lifetime. He thinks almost all of these will happen to you at some point in your life. And so it's kind of cool then is what Aristotle is suggesting is that taken together, all these different excellences of character, all these different virtues, if you will, should cover, at the end of the day, all aspects of human life. And now some contemporary philosophers actually like this idea, and they actually create new virtues that they think are covering areas of life that Aristotle might not have thought of, and they can get interesting. I won't go into. If you're curious, you can tweet me. I can talk more about. Because, for instance, there's a whole book on business ethics that talks about the specific excellences that a person needs to do business well. Now, some of those things are similar to Aristotle, but there's a lot on there that's very unique to business. It's kind of cool. Anyway, if we go back to the definition there of excellence of character, you'll notice that I haven't talked about that last one yet. The idea that the mean or the intermediacy will be determined by a rational or correct prescription. Now, this is really important because as we've seen, hitting the mean, finding that the right intermediacy is going to depend on you. It's going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on lots of things, right? And that's not going to be easy, right? Because if all these things matter, how are you going to ever able to decide what's the right thing to do in the situation? What's the courageous thing to do? What's the mild thing to do? What's the witty thing to do, right? You're going to have a lot going on, and that's not easy. But Aristotle says is what helps you. It's going to be wisdom. Wisdom's going to be what helps you get the correct or rational prescription for how you ought to act. But wisdom is an excellence. I've mentioned this already. Wisdom is an excellence of the intellect. And I'm going to postpone talking about wisdom until the next module, because that's the module where we'll talk about the excellences of the intellect. But right now, what I'd like to continue in this module is talk a little bit more about how we do acquire excellence of character. I've alluded to that already in the previous video, and so I think that's about the time, because that's a good question about how do we acquire these excellences of character. And by the way, what we'll see as we're talking about that is actually how you start to acquire the excellence of wisdom. So we're laying a little groundwork for the next module too. But before going into all that, I know a lot of Aristotle. Let's take one last quick break. Stretch the legs. Let's do a stretch break again. Let's stretch the legs. Then we can come back and finish up this module on the excellences of character. See you back here in a sec.